welcome to the meeting of the Democratic Services Committee on the 13th of December 2021. My name is Councillor Del Morgan. I'm chair of this committee, and just to make you all aware, today's meeting will be or is being recorded. I take it there's no member of the public in attendance. If they were, just the usual message that they mustn't participate. Right, can I please remind everyone to switch phones to silent for the duration of the meeting? And in addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings which have been previously circulated? Namely, microphones should be switched to mute unless you're speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. Please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand function or to raise any technical issues. When asking a question, can you please indicate which page number you are referring to, if appropriate? And when speaking, please introduce yourself, unless, of course, I've introduced you. As you can see, the first item on the agenda is to do a roll call. I will now ask Alison from Democratic Services to take us through this. Alison, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll go through members first. Councillor Anne Harrod-Aubrey.
Present.
Councillor Jeremy Hurley. No. Councillor Sandra Miller. No. Councillor Sean Percy.
Present.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Alan Llewellyn. Councillor Anthony Richards. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Alison.
Thank you. Councillor Anthony Taylor.
Present, Alison.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
Present.
Councillor Leanne Jones.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Stephanie Lynch. I'll now move to officers. Craig Griffiths.
Present, Alison.
Thank you. Stacey Curran.
Here, Alison, thank you.
And Chris Owen.
Present, Alison.
Thank you. Is there anyone present whose name I haven't called this afternoon? No, that's the roll call complete then, Chair. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Alison, thank you. Thank you, members, for bearing with me. I'm now moving to part one of the agenda. So first item is any declarations of interest, please. If not, can I move on to item 2, minutes of the previous meeting, starting on page 3. So if I can ask members to comment or quote any amendments they wish to put forward, pages 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Can I check, officers? I'm looking at a version on my iPad which has at the end of minute 5 IRPW annual report a sentence saying, following consideration of the proposals, members were in support of the recommendations contained within the report. Can I check? We were going to look at that minute and make it clear that it was our council report rather than the IRPW report you were referring to, or even to delete that sentence. Am I right, Craig?
Yes, Chair, what we can do actually, if members are happy, is just clarify that. And I think the easiest way ultimately is just to delete that last sentence. It doesn't really add anything. All members were indicating at the last meeting that they were happy that the Democratic Services Manager would prepare some responses ultimately to go back to the consultation process. That's what happened in the scenario. So if we remove that line, it doesn't change anything substantively, and it just clarifies that members were not saying they were in support of the IRPW, but just they were happy with the information that officers had presented at that time. So we'll clarify that and remove it from the version that gets approved today, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. I'll just check with members. Are you happy that we were just removing the confusion that we were not indicating our support of the IRPW report, but we were supporting our own officers' report, which were noting the IRPW outcomes and so on. So are you happy that we remove that sentence then to make it clear? Okay, I have no objection, so we'll do that. Thank you, Craig. Okay, diolch yn fawr. Item 3. Member ICT Policy Report, starting on pages 11 to 30. And therefore, members, if I introduce this by passing over firstly to Craig, and then I'm sure Chris Owen will will help us out. Craig first.
Okay, thank you very much then, Chair. So I'm happy to introduce this, and I'll bring in Chris if there's any sort of technical related questions, because goodness knows the types of answers you get from me otherwise, Chair, on anything sort of technical in that regard. But just to make you members aware, this is a report we have to take at the time of it coming up of every local government election. So the last time this was brought forward would have been 2017, during the times of the last election. And what it effectively does, it sets out two different structures of information. The first being the IT equipment, ultimately, that members will be provided on member induction in May 2022. And as you'll see, for the most part, it just replicates, obviously, what we are providing you with at present. One of the key things, ultimately, we feel at this stage are laptops as well, because we are concerned, obviously, as we move towards hybrid meeting and we look at the possibility of members working either, for example, in the chamber or at home, we need to look at how the connectivity ultimately works. And it's more practical for members to participate in those meetings via laptops as opposed to iPads, which some members are ultimately utilising at the moment. So that's the technical kit element as part of it. The second element then of the document ties into what we call the use of these items. So in essence, it covers the restrictions about what they can and cannot be used for, and for the most part, it's a replication of the current scheme that's in place, albeit reworded slightly because we needed to add a few additional elements to it at that point just to reflect some of the legislative wording that's out there. But it also contains then some basic principles in respect of freedom of information, data protection, and some of the governance related information surrounding it as well, just so it's all documented in one place for members. It's something that's going to be focused on quite significantly in member induction next year, but what this is meant to do is just bring together some of the various different strategies and sort of information that members need to be aware of as they use the technology ultimately that's been provided. So the report itself is before the Democratic Services Committee today for comment. We'd be grateful for any views or thoughts you may have on the document. Once it's been sort of considered by yourselves then and amended, we'll be asking for it to go to full council for adoption, either at the next council meeting or the one after that, but it will come then into implementation from May 2022 on local government elections, Chair. Happy to answer any questions directly, and again, Chris, Stacey, will be able to answer any questions as well, hopefully. So whatever members wish to ask, hopefully we can try and assist. Thank you, Chair.
Jill, Craig. Yes, it's a pulling together of documentation and updating it, and I'm sure Chris will be on hand to help us if there are any more technical queries. So here they come. I think, first of all, Councillor Steve Hunt. Steve?
Yes, thank you, Dale. Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I think it's self-explanatory, and the links are there as well to help and support us in the information. But can I ask, covered in policy, I noticed it's legislated that you have to provide the right equipment to those who would be elected or are elected. And I'm not sure if speech impairment, hearing impairment, disability, the type of equipment that anybody who may want to stand. I mean, I just wanted to make reference to that lady with Strictly Come Dancing. What an amazing person in how she's gone into the final of that. Sorry to detract from the agenda, Chair, but I just believe that while we're an open book to try to get people to get into politics, which isn't an easy job for many different reasons, but I just wondered, is the policies covering that equipment for those I sort of mentioned, and many others really in different ways, if you get where I'm coming from. So I won't go into them all, but that's all it is, Chair. Thank you.
I'm going to give you a 6 for that, Steve. So Craig, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Hunt. So what happens on member induction next year is we'll be asking every member to work with us in what we call a sort of inequality screening process, where what we do as part of that is identify if any members have any additional needs or any additional support that will ultimately be necessary, and we look then to try and implement that in whichever way we can, look whether that would be different support that the Democratic Services officers can provide, additional technical solutions which could potentially come from Chris and his team. But yeah, we work working with individual members, so there's no bar or anyone being able to participate in any process. We'll always find ways to try to support any member with any issue going forward to make sure that it's addressing and they can participate in any way that they wish.
Thank you, Craig. Chris, can I ask you, first of all, is there any officer with, sort of designated with the task of looking at all these factors to help those with additional needs to access, or is it the whole team needs to know about it?
Yeah, it'll be a case-by-case basis, effectively. So we'll need to look at what those needs are. There may be specialist equipment that we need to bring in to support, visually impaired, for example, or hard of hearing. But it'll be very much then working with specialist suppliers in those cases, because they are quite unique requirements, if you like. So the technical solutions that we would deploy would depend on the need, and then the support wrapper that we'd have to put around it then as well, then for that individual member.
Thanks. And lastly, Chris, on that, there's probably a commonality of issues across different authorities. Presumably you're in touch with colleagues in other authorities to swap ideas if necessary, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there are a number of specialist agencies out there that deal with wide cases of need, if you like, across user bases. So we are already engaged with those, be it for officers' own uses in certain areas or other needs. So yeah, absolutely, we'd be linked up with others around that.
Thanks. Steve?
And Chair, just briefly for bring Sean in, and this would apply to all scrutiny and full council. You're looking at that as an overall, not just having the equipment, it's about doing their work then to the best of their ability in whatever capacity they are. That's correct, is it, Craig and Chris? Yeah, thanks, Del.
Okay. Yes, I'm sure that is. And I mean, this is looking at the ICT part of it, but I'm sure we would extend that to all aspects of a councillor's work, and officers come to that. So there we go. Right, diolch yn fawr. Thank you. So, Councillor Sean Percy. Sean, next.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, my question is in relation to a request I've been making for quite some time now in terms of members' IT. And access to emails and office on personal computers or other devices. I'm wondering whether this scheme as written prevents that from happening as it's currently written. I know it's been sort of knocking about for a while, and I seem to bring it up in every meeting now. But in my previous employment, we had the same email system. We used Outlook, Office, etc. And I was able to log in on a personal device using the web browser, using two-factor authentication, access my emails on that device. I've got a desktop computer here, 2 screens, which is ideally set up for me, but I can't access any of my council emails on that. And the second part of that was actually Office applications. So I have the same issue. I don't have a copy of Office that I'm able to use on my personal computer. I don't have a license for that. My previous job allowed me to log in using my work credentials, so I could then carry out that work on using the Office applications on my computer, and I can't do that at the moment either. So it may be still being worked on, discussed. That's fine, but I'm wondering whether the policy as written would prevent that being implemented if it was possible, or whether there's room to manoeuvre there. That's the question, Chair. Thank you.
Chris, your team is looking into this.
Yes, Chair. So effectively, the reason we can't deploy Outlook to personal devices at the moment in the main is because the version of Outlook that we're running doesn't support that. So we can't secure the environment in which we're operating. We are looking to bring it forward to a more recent release, which would start to allow us to look at those opportunities. What we can do at the moment is look at personal devices and as in a mobile device. So as long as the mobile device can be put into our management console, which allows us to effectively secure the email, then we would be able to look to do that. And the policy does state that can be the case. But going forward, as these new opportunities come online, as things become available, what we would look to do is obviously review the policies that are in place and then bring them up to speed and evolve them as needs be. So they're not set in stone for the next 5 years. They're there for the point in time. But then obviously as new opportunities come to the table, we'll look to then evolve them as members need it.
Sean, your question probably is a slightly wider question than just the mobile phone situation there. But are you happy that the team will look at it, and as and when, if you continue nagging them, and if we all ask, at some point in time, we can come back to the policy and amend it. And I presume, Craig, an amendment to encompass that sort of change wouldn't involve anything much more than a short report to Democratic Services Committee and then on to Council.
Absolutely right, Chair, indeed. So the actual policy itself, although it's ultimately adopted by Council, the main function ultimately for considering it will be via Democratic Services Committee. So if there was a case maybe that the members' IT panel, for example, were looking at a particular issue and they wanted to recommend a potential change, then we would just do a report to Democratic Services Committee and it would be job done, as far as I'm concerned. We'll try and keep the reports at a minimum just to make this a living policy for members to update as much as possible.
There we are. Okay, Sean, I mean, we need to be happy at this point that at least we're looking at it, and then hopefully when the time comes, it won't take any, any great delays of getting it through to making it all official. Thank you. Thanks, Chris, as well. Looking for hands. I don't see any further hands on this item. No, if members are happy, then we go back to page 13. There's a recommendation that members approve the amended members' ICT policy, including internet usage policy, and commend the same to Council for ratification. Can I have someone to move that, please, and second?
Happy to move, Chair.
Thank you.
I second.
Diolch yn fawr, Angharad, thank you. All right, unless we see any hands to the contrary, we'll take that as being approved. Diolch. Right, we're moving on to a very interesting item now. Item 4, e-petitions. Pages 31 to 54. And this is totally new ground for us. Therefore, Craig, can you please introduce this and then we'll open it up.
Of course, Chair. So, yeah, as Councillor Morgan just mentioned, this is new ground for us. It's something that we've been working on now for a few months in that sense, and Stacey and her team have been looking to see how we can integrate this with our sort of new systems, our new processes, etc. It's still a work in progress at this stage, but ultimately what we're aiming to do with this particular report is bring to you an overarching policy, ultimately for members to consider. So you'll be aware, as I've spoken on numerous occasions, that the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021 has made numerous changes in respect of democratic services arrangements. It started how we've been implementing it here in Neath Talbot a few weeks ago with our public speaking protocol, which was approved by Council and will go live now in the new year. We have some further work to do in respect of our participation strategy, which we will be implementing throughout 2022. But this is another key element of it, in that the legislation now requires us to have what's called a petition scheme, where ultimately, as the name would sense, members of the public can petition the council to consider or debate certain matters and to have particular matters raised on agendas for councillors to have a debate on. So the scheme itself is ultimately before members now, and it is a draft scheme at the moment. It's something that will probably be ever changing as we go through different things, but this is ultimately what we are suggesting to members that we start with. And it's pretty much prescribed for the most part in what some of the legislation tells us. So the time scales, the types of matters that can or cannot be considered, it all comes from legislation at this stage. So for example, it has to be with some of the powers that the council is operating under. So it's got to be something that affects this council. It can't really be discussing members' conduct. It can't really discuss about salary levels of staff members. This is about the services ultimately that the community receives from Neath Talbot Council, and the opportunity then for members of the public to be able to ask for certain matters to be considered and for views ultimately to be known then via the various councils, committees, cabinet boards, etc., and all of those issues to be taken into account. The issue, though, where we do have some flexibility on at this stage, and it's probably the area I would like to have the most input from members on today and going forward, is a threshold, ultimately, as to what triggers something actually being debated then at a council meeting. So that's the cabinet board, or one of the committees. So you'll see, for example, on paragraph 4.10 which is on page 50 of your papers. I've come up with a sort of basic set of figures there, but it is very much open to debate and very much open to amendment at this stage. I've based the figures looking at what other authorities seem to utilise. Some adopt a very high threshold, which I felt didn't really seem appropriate for the first time in which to start. And looking at what our population ultimately is in Neath, Talbot, my sort of suggestion in this case that if it's between 1 and 100, it could be a response from a chief officer, so head of service, director, chief executive, as to how matters are ultimately going to be considered. 100 to 500, looking at a response from a cabinet member, so individuals in the community can see obviously that it is being brought to the attention of members and those issues ultimately for consideration. And then 500 plus being the full council or cabinet board. But as I indicated, these are just some rough figures which I've put together at the moment. I would be very much interested hearing from the Democratic Services Committee as to what potential numbers they think could ultimately be relevant at this stage. The other aspect then that comes with it is we will be developing an e-petition scheme. So it wouldn't be necessary anymore for people to submit a handwritten copy of a petition to the council for them to consider. We will have a setup on our website, which is effectively linked into our ModGov system, which obviously our members will be familiar with. And to some extent, it operates in quite a similar way to the change.org website, which I imagine a lot of members are ultimately going to be familiar with. So if individuals want to create a petition, they can just go onto our website, put the details in there. It would get sent to Democratic Services section then for them to approve to ensure it complies ultimately with the policy that members would have agreed. And then it's live. And when it meets the threshold, we'll be able to see then ultimately when it's going to be considered via the various members. So hopefully the policy is somewhat self-explanatory, but happy to take any questions, and Stacey and myself will be on that. But I would be very interested to hear the signatories element and the threshold from members as to what your thoughts would be, and we can update that accordingly, because once again, this is something that will have to be adopted at full council because it will involve a few changes to our constitution. Chair.
Diolch yn fawr, Craig. Before I call on members, can I just first point out that, yes, in the agenda front sheet, it's listed as e-petitions, but members will notice that this report is actually about the introduction of a petition system where e-petitions become just a subset or a version or a variation on that. So we're talking about petitions per se, not just electronic ones. Is that correct, Craig?
It is indeed, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's reflected, I think, in the recommendations, which, when we come to them eventually, will be on page 36, by the way. Okay, so members, now then, an interesting topic. Let's see what we make of it. First hand up is Councillor Steve Hunt again. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to sound a bit daft here, Craig, so bear with me. You're used to me by now anyway, sounding a bit daft. But right. Special characteristics, reading through the reports and showing them petitions for this, petitions for that, religious education and sex and sexual orientations and so forth. Explanatory information, I'm not grasping the concept. I appreciate we can have a petition for anything at any time. And then it makes reference to using the members of the public, obviously involved in any petition, and they're always been there in society. They're online and they go on to social media websites and they get so many to go to Welsh Government. But purposes of just explain to me, a purpose of a petition really is to deliver or to support something that's quite important, I would assume, when they create them. I just wonder, within the categorically and special characteristic brackets, what maybe an example of a type of petition you could have? I'm not understanding whether there's not enough, perhaps for the disabled, not enough access to public places and so forth. Maybe, that comes to council and then we debate it to take the Welsh Government to provide funding. But on other things, I mean, can you give more of And what I would like to see perhaps is more of the explaining of the petition, perhaps more in layman terms. Sorry if I'm perhaps being a little bit dafter than others, and they might understand it a lot better than me. But I'm a bit lost in the concept of the e-petitions. And like the chair said, we could have a paper petition anyway, print them out and go round. But I hope you grasp where I'm coming from. But sorry if you're not.
I'm sure, Steve, I'm sure Craig wouldn't tell you if he didn't. Anyway, he's too polite. But can I ask, before Craig answers you, are you going along the lines of if a petition is very generalised or very specific to a detail? Is that what you sort of thing you mean?
Well, yes, because, I don't want it aimed, well, it obviously can be aimed, given what's in there. We've got gender, I don't know the proper name for it now, but, not knowing your gender, then I've forgotten what it's called. But what I'm getting at is that specifically, there's nothing wrong with all petitions, no matter what it is. It could be save the birds and save the ants or whatever. But I'm just trying to get a concept, given where we are in council, Chair, given the workforce. I just wondered about the work, which it's fine. I'm not suggesting not, but it's a complete mess in what it's trying to do, really. And but like you said, there's general petitions, but there can be characteristic specific petitions, of course, which gets a lot of support. So yeah, I think what you said is what I'm on about.
Okay, well, I'll let Craig have a go at that. But don't forget, this petition thing is coming up as part of the Welsh Government's drive. So we we have to follow it, and we have to do our best with it. And yes, it will take some officer time, I'm sure. But there we go, Craig.
Okay, no problem at all. So, I mean, the first issue, obviously, just so you members will be aware of, this is what I call the legal document that's ultimately be necessary. So it's that formal policy, ultimately, which sets out how everything works. What will happen when we effectively go live with our policy documents, and then when we look at these issues, we create user-friendly guides. So we explain to the public the basic principles behind things, what they need to be aware of, the do's and don'ts, etc. So members of the public would not never have to look at a formal policy like this. They will have some short, sharp information, obviously, to make them aware how they go about doing things. Picking up the point then, obviously, that Councillor Hunt was mentioning just then. What the petition scheme ultimately is designed to do is where there is a service-related issue or it's a matter that's something which is in the control of Neath Talbot Council. So like it would be, for example, if members wish to ask questions at council's meetings on notices of motion, which you'd all be familiar with, it always has to relate ultimately to the council's functions and something that we've actually got control ultimately that we would be able to do. So the issues obviously which Councillor Hunt mentioned about Equality Act compliance, sex discrimination, they are factors that are just the prevailing factors, so the overarching issues that we consider in all matters ultimately that we considered. What we're trying to achieve ultimately with this petition scheme is a scope that if there is something of local community interest, or there is something which members of a particular group of individuals, which could be residents of a street or something along those sort of lines, have an issue which they wish the council to consider, which, for example, they write in letters about. So an example could be a traffic calming measure in a particular street. It could be a noise-related issue generated from such and such a place, the case may be. It gives the scope ultimately for those residents to come together and to petition something to the council. So they are seeing that there are a large number of individuals who could potentially be affected by a particular issue, and they're asking the council ultimately to consider the same. It could be, for example, something to do with a sports facility. It could be something to do with one of our multi-use games areas, which they would like the council to consider adopting. It could be playing facilities, ultimately, and playgrounds need to be redecorated, or different elements. It's meant to give as much scope, ultimately, to members of the public that if they feel that there is something they would like the council to be considering, as well as all the other avenues which are open to them at the moment, like public speaking, like going through their elected members, there is another route ultimately. And I think we've all seen over recent times the implementation of websites like change.org and the ability for people to come together to be able to petition the council or organisations in various ways. This is just going to be another avenue ultimately for them to do so. So it's meant to give as much flexibility as possible to the members of the public to ask for things to be considered which they feel are important to them.
Okay, Steve. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thank you. Not sure if I got my answer, but that's all right. Thank you, Craig.
Well, I'm sure we got some further clarity, but this isn't a crystal clear subject, anyways. It is going to we're going to have to feel how we go along to a certain extent. I mean, one question is, what is the difference between a petition signed by 10 people and a letter signed by 10 people? We'll come back to that, I'm sure. Anyway, Sean has been waiting patiently. You come in, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, well, I've been sort of, I suppose, excited is probably the right word, just to see this come back and have a look at it. So, yeah, I've got a couple of queries, I suppose, in terms of some of the wording and what the impacts might be. I'll come on to the sort of thresholds in a bit. But I suppose the first thing that I thought was interesting, and particularly with the discussion we just had, is as it's written at the moment, it says, the petition must relate to something the council is responsible or over which the council has some influence. Now, that last bit could be up for debate on a number of issues. And I just wonder how we deal with that one. Whose judgment is that? Because I'm thinking, and I'll use the example as a petition started recently for an issue in my ward. It's got several thousand signatures in relation to the North Breakwater, known as the pier. It's owned by Associated British Ports. So the petition is to ABP. Lots of people were mistaken thinking the council were responsible for it, but you could argue the council would have influence over Associated British Ports in that we have a relationship with them. It's adjacent to our land. It's within a seaside resort that we manage. So I think that's quite a good example to kind of test that wording. Would we then take a petition in that instance, even if the primary responsibility rests with another organisation, but actually maybe the impacts of what the petition is considering may affect council-run services and council facilities? I think that one it opens up a lot, doesn't it? And I wonder what your thoughts really are on that, Craig, in terms of how we might deal with that particular element.
It's interesting in that sense, and it was something that I was to and froing with, ultimately looking at the wording as well. A lot of it would ultimately depend on the wording of what any petition ultimately would be. So if it was asking the council to do something specifically, then I would argue we have no influence over another party, so we're not able to actually do anything because it could be interfering with their rights. But if the petition was, for example, to ask the council to write to a letter to ABP to ask them for their consideration on such matter, that is within the gift of the council, and it is something that we have the potential influence for. So a lot of it would come down to what the wording of the petition is going to be in that scenario. And one of the benefits, obviously, with the e-petition element is before we can make a decision whether to accept or reject a petition, we would see the wording of it, and we would have an opportunity to go back to the individual who has suggested it to try and explain, okay, well, it doesn't meet the criteria because of this reason, but if you change the wording, we could do it in this way instead. So it's going to be that twofold of communication ultimately for it, where we're going to have to try and work with the individuals to make something that we can achieve. And it's very similar to what we do, for example, notices of motion and questions before members. When a member has something they wish to put forward, we work with them ultimately to try and support it, to get it into a structure that could work. We'll be doing the exactly same with members of the community as well who wish to start this petition and be that sort of guidance and support for them at the same time.
Thanks, Craig. Before I come back to Sean, his question about, if you like, the judgment. So who is the referee? I guess, Craig, ultimately, you're going to have a lot of this coming back to you as a backstop.
Yeah, I think very much so in the sense. So the way we've built the policy is that democratic services officers will be the gatekeepers, effectively, of all of the various petitions that are created. So Stacey and her team will be monitoring that. When there is a concern as to whether something is not in accordance with the policy, it's a decision by the chief executive and myself as the monitoring officer from a legal perspective, ultimately for it. My view is, though, we adopt as a liberal approach ultimately as we can in these sort of issues. We will always try and facilitate democratic processes, and that's always the mantra in which we try and adopt. It's only when something categorically doesn't reach this policy or is not in accordance with it would it be something ultimately we would reject. But again, this is something I think we've got no idea at this stage of the volume of petitions ultimately we could see. Some authorities like Welsh Government, for example, have petition committees ultimately to consider them. If we feel that the volume of petitions is starting to increase, we may go back and have another look at this, and we may think, well, actually, we need to bring a more standardized approach to it with maybe some member involvement at the same time then as well. But if working on the assumption we're only going to get a handful every now and then, we don't want to over-resource or overcommit certain officers or members ultimately to those elements. So I think it is something we're going to have to keep under quite significant review at this stage.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Sean, have you got anything for us on the trigger levels? I'm sure I'm interested to hear what you've got to say about them.
Well, I just want to pick up a little bit more on this particular issue in terms of the matters of the council have influence over. I suppose then, Craig, in theory, we could get petitions coming to us asking for the council to take a position on an issue of public concern.
Yes.
That would be very different from asking the council to put up a bus shelter or a new play area. Is, that's something of the council's responsibility, but we could get somebody saying, please support the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, or please support X, Y, or Z. And that would be in order, generally speaking, as it's currently written, if somebody wanted to request that.
Indeed, it would obviously have to be debated by members as to whether you wish to consider that, and there may be a number of factors which would have to be advice given to you by officers at that point as to what your position ultimately would be for it. But if it met the necessary threshold, it could trigger a debate on these issues then ultimately forward at the same time.
Okay, no, thanks for that. I think that's interesting, and I think that could be another avenue really where people can get involved and also understand what we think on some of these issues that affect the area but not necessarily under our control. So I quite like that. I think that's really interesting. Yeah, in terms of the thresholds, I don't think you're far off really. I think that's a good starting point. I was just looking through some petitions that have happened over the last couple of years on my phone, seeing what things have come through, and the one I mentioned about the pier, is in the thousands, and it affects lots of people. Lots of people are interested in it. That I think fine. There was a local petition I had for a pedestrian crossing point and a bus shelter. It had about 180 signatures, and that would have fallen in the cabinet member bracket, and I think that's probably a reasonable, you wouldn't really need to take that to a full committee to discuss that local issue. We ended up dealing with it as members in any case. But the only thing I'd say is, obviously, if people did get into it, 500 isn't that high a bar, is it? So I think it's very, I think we probably should just wait and see how it goes. Because there's two ways we could look at it. We could either raise the bar, or, as you say, accommodate the higher level of petitions with a committee or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think certainly for the lower ones, that seems sensible. I think you could argue whether that 500 should be higher in terms of coming to full council or something like that. But I'd be happy for it to go ahead as it is, and let's see how it goes, because we've got nothing really to lose if we apart from a lot of time.
Thanks, Sean. Can we park that thought for a second? I just wanted to check something with Craig. Because I'd come back and make a comment as well on threshold. The trialing of it, if we can put it that way, once council adopt this, hopefully, we're going to pilot this, aren't we? So, I mean, it will come into effect immediately once council has passed it.
What we'll be doing, Chair, is we're not going to implement it straight away at this point because we want to create some user-friendly guides ultimately for people. So we will have it prepared, obviously, now in early January in that sense, and get those user-friendly guides in place and get them published. We'll then publicise it. I'm conscious of the fact probably it's not going to perhaps be fully implemented and everything up and running probably until after the elections next year, because obviously we're going to have much more limits ultimately what we can do between March, April and May, because obviously the pre-election period that we find ourselves in. So what we want to do is we want to have the policy approved, have all the documents ready to go, get them onto the website so it becomes a fait accompli on day one, obviously, of any new administration that's elected, that the petition schemes are part of the process then ultimately as well.
Thanks, Craig. That's okay. That's clear. Right. So whatever we finalise in terms of thresholds and details, they'll come into play from the next civic year. Okay, Sean, before I bring you back, this just continuing something that Sean initiated there about the size and the scope of a petition. At both ends, I just have some points or some questions really. It is the large petition. Sean mentioned at the end there about 500 and you know, e-petitions can easily rack up, can't they, in terms of signatures. Now, officers may or may not have time to look very closely at what the signatures are and you know, where they've come from, because if you'll read members in the guidelines, we've got specific points about whether someone resides in the county borough or if they work there, or and so on, isn't it? But you know, there are some tasks involved, I suppose, in checking that this is the case. Now, if you're going to end up with thousands of petition signatures on one petition, and they all seem to be coming from, I'll just pick Neath Town Centre, for example, then I guess we can go with that. What I'm not sure of, if you have an e-petition, you know, with 1,000 signatures and they're all at hotmail.co.uk or whatever, then that's a different question. So I'm just wondering if Craig, are we confident that we are pitching the top end of this in the right place, and secondly that we can deal with it? And I'll come back to a question about the lower end later.
I think we'll have the setup in place, obviously, as much as we can in this sense. So, for example, for a petition ultimately to be started, we need to make sure, obviously, the resident does reside in NPT, it's valid, so it will be checked via the Democratic Services team as part of the process. Once then the threshold appears to have been met for the individual circumstances, we will then monitor ultimately to see the signatories. So it's never going to be an ongoing process where officers will be looking at the signatures every time one is ultimately made. When we can see it's ultimately reached the threshold, an officer then will sit down and review as much as possible. Are we going to be able to identify 500 signatories, for example, and confirm their residence within Neath Talbot or work within Neath Talbot? It's probably going to be very unlikely because we're not going to have all the information on the data to be able to do that. But officers will use their best judgment and use the information that is open to them to try and make that determination as much as possible, Chair. I think is probably the best way for us to look at it in that sense. And again, if we find, for example, that it doesn't work in principle, we may have to bring a report back and we're going to have to look at new ways ultimately to operate it. This is so new ultimately from the council's perspective. At the same time, we've had no experience in these areas. It could be an ever-changing process which we'll be working with members on to perfect it and to develop a new system that will tick all the boxes for us going forward.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sure that there will be potentially, queries about what signatures are on large lists. But as you say, maybe we just deal with them if and when they arise, and then the pilot can conclude if we're monitoring whether we're going to carry on like this or not. Can I ask quickly, on the bottom end of the table, the small petitions, you got it 1 to 100. I think I may have picked this up previously with you, but when it says response from the relevant director or head of service and is treated as standard correspondence, this is where I begin to question what is the point of it being a petition rather than just correspondence. Is there a difference, Craig? I mean, we tick the box to say that we, hey, Welsh Government, we're doing this, but is it? Are we really doing it if it's just like correspondence?
It is pretty much one and the same. There is no denying that ultimately. It just provides the opportunity that if a petition doesn't reach a particular threshold of, for example, a full debate, but so the public can take comfort of knowing that it will get a response if it meets that level. But it's the case, if it's just one person has signed it, we treat it as it would normal letter. So I do see the point, obviously, in what you're saying there, Councillor Morgan, that anything between the 1 and 100 matter is the equivalent of correspondence in any other sense of the word. But again, it's just having that opportunity out there. If people wanted to petition for it and it doesn't meet a threshold, knowing that it will still get responded and what that position ultimately would be.
Thanks. And lastly, then, in the middle, you've got the response from Cabinet Member from 100 up to 101 up to 500. Is that the right range then in that case? I mean, should the lower range be smaller than 100 or not? I don't know. I'm just asking the question without any strong views, really.
Again, it could be very much open to what the position would be. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact that where a cabinet member obviously is going to be responding, there will also be issues, obviously, that they will be involving officers, obviously, to gather more information and to be able to consider those matters accordingly. So it just attracts a different status, I think you could argue, when it comes from a cabinet member as opposed to coming from an officer who's been liaising on the matter. It could be reduced down ever so slightly. So you could say, for example, that 1 to 50 could be officers, 50 to 500 could be cabinet members, 500 plus would be the full council element. There is probably no overarching hard and fast rule. They were just some numbers, taking what Councillor Percy was saying earlier on about the numbers, where ultimately some could sometimes trigger a full debate, not being too high or not being too low when trying to get that correct figure for it. So there are some ballpark figures at this stage is probably the best way to describe it, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Well, as I said, I'm not sure if I'm strongly for or against these actual numbers, but I'd like members to say what they think. Right, Sean, you come back now.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, there's a couple of other things I wanted to sort of pick up on, though I'm still mulling over these numbers a little. I've been reading through some more petitions while you've been talking, just trying to get a bit of a sense of some others around Neath Talbot, and I don't know, I'm probably leaning to the side that maybe 1,000 is a good bar to come to a meeting, but like I said, I'm open-minded in terms of the testing the waters, whether we leave it as it is or not. But I'll just address some of the other things in the report for a minute. One of them was around the duration of the petitions. Now, it's quite vague in the report. I don't think there was any minimum or maximum parameters specified that I could see. Now, I wonder whether we ought to do that. Obviously, you could have a petition that just runs and runs and runs and runs otherwise, couldn't you, if it's not actually specified. I think it says it needs to be specified by the petition organizer at the start, but could they do it? Could they say a year? Could they say, what is there a limit on that? I'm thinking for say overarching issues like spend more money on X or council tax or whatever, you could have a very long time scale on that if you wanted to attract more signatures.
Sean,
as opposed to perhaps.
Sean, sorry to interrupt. I take your point. It's a very important one. I don't know whether, well, Craig can respond in terms of the logistics, but if somebody comes forward with a petition and they want a very long end date, then on the other hand, they won't get their point looked at for a long time, will they? So maybe it should be in their hands in one sense. But anyway, you carry on and I'll let Craig come back on that.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It's just come to me as a thought about how that may transpire. Because I suppose, in terms of the number of signatures, if we're using that as a benchmark to say what is the strength of feeling on an issue, and people can effectively move the goalposts as to how many signatures they can get over a period of time, I don't know, it just feels like it might be a bit inconsistent, and maybe we should have a cap as to how long they can run. I think do other providers and websites do that? I'm sure there's a cap on some of these things. Might be something that's worth considering, just to make sure that people aren't going to sort of run a petition for a month, get 50 signatures, then think, okay, then, I'll wait till the 6-month period, and then next time I'll do it for longer and longer and longer. I don't know. The other point was around the follow-up in terms of decisions being made and coming to meetings. So it mentions that there'll be a hearing where the lead organiser, I think the term was, could address the committee or the meeting of full council. And then it says, following the hearing, it will be debated by councillors, which I'm assuming is the same meeting, for 15 minutes. Then it's likely they'll request an investigation, etc., etc. I've just wondered, it says they'll receive written confirmation of the outcome of the discussion. I'm just wondering whether we need to make it clearer in terms of how we will keep the petition organiser informed through the process. So, i.e., if a report then comes back to that committee, will we be saying, well, on this date, on the 16th of December, you know, a report's going to come back looking at your issue that you raised, or are we going to be silent until the end and say, on the 16th of December, we decided to do X? There's a difference between those, isn't there? Reporting an outcome and maybe allowing the petition organiser to attend the meeting as a member of the public and observe the report that comes back. So I just wanted to flag that up, whether that's something we could add in or whether that was the intention all along. I don't know.
I think we should add it in. As a good point, Sean.
Thanks.
There we go. If I can take the latter part of Councillor Percy's question first, absolutely fine. We can make it clear in that sense that we will keep members of the public aware unless they tell us they don't want to be made aware. Obviously, they may have submitted the petition and ultimately feel that that would be sufficient ultimately for them, but certainly we can keep that information. And going back to the issue of the timescales, it is a balance ultimately. On hindsight, listening to what Councillor Percy was saying, maybe we do need to be a little bit more specific, simply being so people get a response. If it's an issue ultimately they're going to be writing to us on and want to be able to consider it, it could be a long time ultimately before they get to various signatures. And if it's something that we need to be able to take forward and be seen to be responding to as a council, maybe we need to put a timescale in there as to how long that petition ultimately will be live on our website ultimately for it to be considered. Otherwise, it could be drip feeding for 18 months all of a sudden, when all of a sudden it reaches 500, when ultimately it's of no relevance to the community anymore because people have moved on quite significantly since that point. So I'll find a time scale and I'll balance that out then as part of how long we can keep the document online for.
Good, thanks, Craig. Right, are you okay with that, Sean? Right, good, thank you. Steve Hunt, please.
Yeah, just very briefly to come back, Craig. When we refer to e-petitions, now, again, I didn't see anything in there how we can be specific. And if we open this up completely, I'm sure I could go online, chuck an e-petition in with the traffic that comes through. People will sign a petition, they'll read it and they'll sign it, right? And it could be from all over the country. You know, I could get you a petition with 10 to 20,000 signatures. Now, I don't see anything covered here, and again, I don't suppose if it's in relationship that it affects them, you know, on something. I appreciate council tax and things like that, Neath, Talbot, and that's what we're responsible for. But it could be like Sean was mentioning about the port authorities and stuff, and there could be things that they could be visitors to Neath, Talbot, so they could be wanting to promote or support something that's going to improve the area. So it's a grey area, and I just wonder about I think Del touched on it well, the importance of the size of petitions, because obviously we would all feel that if there's a 20,000 signatures, then that would be something that people really were mindful of and cared about. But it's not necessarily the case because of who is signing it. So I just wondered about the rules and how our addresses going on there with postcodes. Well, you know, like we did on the paper copies, or because e-petitions could be totally different. So sorry to chuck that in at the end, but I just thought about it, and I thought it was quite important for the petitions not to be abused either. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Hunt, you're absolutely right there. So when people are signing their petitions, there will be information that they will have to provide ultimately as part of their petition basis, which would only be accessible via the Democratic Services team, obviously, for us to make sure that from data protection perspective, that everything is ultimately in order. If it becomes evident, shall we say, that there are a number of people outside the county borough of a certain percentage of the numbers are not relevant in that sense. When ultimately you get a report ultimately to the council cabinet, scrutiny committee, wherever it may ultimately be, will highlight some of those issues ultimately for members to be aware so they can consider it as part of their debate. And then the principles obviously as to whether it is important or not, or whether there are any issues, that will be within your gift as members then ultimately to determine going forward. The purpose of this petition scheme is not to bind members into making certain decisions, but just to give you an indication of things which are of particular relevance to the community, so you can consider it to decide whether it's something you want to consider or you want officers to ultimately do any work to. It will never say you must act in a certain matter because 1,500 members are saying they would like a traffic calming measure. There will always be other factors ultimately that come into it, but it'll be your opportunity to hear from members of the public direct, effectively, is what the best way for us to look at it. And just so you can understand maybe the strength of feeling on some point, because you may have seen, for example, something which could have maybe 10 or 15 letters that come in, but a petition, example, from a community would know how people feel about certain issues, which can factor into your decision making. It will never make up your mind for you. It will never bind you to pursue a course of action, but it's just another contributory factor is probably the best way for us to look at it.
Thanks, Craig. So again, it forms part of the judgment jigsaw, if I can put it that way. Right. So I don't see any other hands up. I'm still coming back to the table of 4.10. You know, the trigger points. So 1 to 100 at the moment is just treated like a letter with you know, with a relevant director or head of service having to make a response, without going through any formal committees or anything. Then 101 up to 500 is the response from the cabinet member. So again, it doesn't necessarily go to any meeting of council, but one of the cabinet members has to make a formal response. And then 500 plus for the referral then to a meeting, either of council or one of the maybe cabinet committees or boards. So members, if you're not coming in with any alternative numbers for these triggers, I wondered about the lower one, whether it was 1 to 100 or whether it should be just 1 to 50 and then 50 to 500. Don't have any strong feelings, Craig, on that myself, but if no other members do feel strongly about the numbers that we've got, then, well, we just run with them as a pilot, as a trial. Sean, do you want to come back?
Yeah, no, only quickly. I think we need to just keep a watching brief on that upper one. I'm not so concerned about the lower one, to be honest with you. But I just think we do need to keep a watching brief on it, see how it goes in the pilot, and maybe consider putting that to maybe 1,000 based on some of the things I've been looking at. But, you know, I don't think there's any harm in leaving it as it is for now. And, you know, I just express that because that is my view on it, Chair.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, right, and I mean, I think that underlines one of the important aspects of the monitoring of this pilot as it starts off next summer. Right, no other hands up, so I'm going to, let's see, take it that the trigger stays as it is for piloting now, and I think the recommendation that we've got starts, it's on page 36. Here we are. So, members, the recommendations are, having due regard to the integrated impact screening assessment, that A, members of this committee consider the draft NPT petition scheme, recommending any changes that they feel are appropriate. So we don't really have any major changes. We've had a few ideas that Craig has taken on board. And that B, is delegated authority be granted to myself to agree the final draft for commending to council on behalf of our committee. And this will happen, Craig, in the next week or so.
That's what we're aiming for, Chair, certainly. And what I would also suggest, if members are happy with this, we add petition schemes, obviously, to our forward work programme, and we bring regular reports back to members of the Democratic Services Committee for them to consider how the policy could be working, any changes, and any other issues we may wish to consider then at that point as well. So it will now become a standing item.
Thanks, Craig. Can we make it clear that we're talking about petitions, not just e-petitions, and that that will be put right for council, I'm sure. Okay, so colleagues, that's the recommendation, page 36, or the two recommendations. Can I have somebody please to move and second?
Move, Chair.
Thank you.
I second.
Diolch yn Harad. So no hands showing for being against or abstaining. No, right, I'm taking it that all members are happy with that. Diolch yn fawr iawn, thank you. That's a very interesting new idea for us, so thank you very much for that, for this discussion. O'r gore. Right, mlaen I item 5, on to item 5. This is the forward work programme for 2021-22, page 55. We have today's meeting and the 21st of February. And members, you can see what's in there for the meeting in February. Annual report and various constitutional issues that we look at annually. I'm sure Stacey will bring back to us anything that crops up in the meantime, and these other items that we've dealt with, especially in the last few months. There are quite a few of those. If anything crops up with regard to those, we can bring those in to debate, can't we? So you've been very busy with one thing or another. Thank you, members, for being involved with all of those things. Okay, so if you're all happy with the forward work programme as it stands, that brings us to item 6, which is urgent items. There are no urgent items, so I'm sure members will be happy that means that we've come to the end of the agenda and the end of the calendar year, basically, for our work. So may I thank you all, members. Sincerely, I do thank you for all your contributions. It's very, very useful to hear your own perspectives on things. So I'm very pleased that I think we've had good debates here in this committee. So diolch yn fawr iawn unwaith eto. Thank you very much. And of course, thanks to the officers for all the hard work and for bearing with me. I can't see him now. The IT backup that I get to keep me going on this contraption. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll see each other in full council hopefully next week. But otherwise, happy Christmas. Nadolig llawen i chi gyd a blwyddyn newydd dda. I'll close the meeting. Diolch.
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 Talbot.